that day that the merger, for lack of a better term, was announced, there were a bunch of people, Brooks Koepka, your old pal included, who were saying, oh, you know, how's Brandel doing? Welfare check on Chamblee, I think was his tweet.
I think today is the biggest day in the history of professional golf.
PGA Tour and LIV Golf are now partners.
Brandel speaking, I think he is very highly anticipated.
So you've talked about how, you know, professional golfers are not your audience. That's not, you're not catering to the guys that are out there that you're talking about. But you're also not necessarily catering to the most vocal minority of social media commenters, say.
Nope.
Who are you listening to? Like, are there voices who give you feedback that you really value, or do you really try to get that feedback just from yourself and how you've measured up to your goals going into the show?
Yeah, I listen to, you know, it's not like I'm not broadcasting for professional golfers, because there are only,
yeah, there aren't that many of them.
well, I mean, in the
there's
world,
a lot of other people besides the
there might be
people I just
10,000
mentioned.
of them,
Yeah.
which sounds like a lot, but there's 50 million golfers, so the math doesn't work out that that's a significant number. And then I'm certainly not talking to, you know, the people on social media who think that they're arbiter of all that's right and wrong with the game of golf, although they are informed, and so I certainly read their stuff, listen to their stuff, and pay attention to it. And I try to, you know, read as much as I can what the best players in the world are saying. But my audience is the core golfer. It's, you know, it's the guys out here that pay $300 to go play golf, or $200 or whatever it is they pay to play golf. That's the audience. It's the core golfer. You know, it's the people I take golf trips with. And, you know, it's not that I don't listen to criticism. I get plenty of it. If the criticism, I think, is well-founded and not profane, I certainly consider it. I don't think you should just dismiss criticism. There's a grain of truth, I think, in criticism, most criticism. Although it's difficult, you know, on Twitter, you know, and in social media, you know, there are so many bots in the world. You know, how many bots do the Saudis have? You know, tens of thousands of them. And so when I talk about LIV, you know, I'll get a lot of interaction, negative interaction on Twitter, but 95% of it is bots. And then the other 4% of it are people who've been bought, and 1% of it are just people who disagree with me. And that 1% is usually fairly polite. It's just the bots and the people who've been bought that are trying to drum up, because social media algorithms reward discord, and it rewards bullying, and people tend to believe that. When I have people, you know, when the merger of the Tour and LIV happened, or the proposed merger happened, you know, and you know, I had people call me and like, "Hey, are you all right?" I'm like, "Am I all right?" Like, yeah, I'm fine. Why? They're like, "Well, I just see all this stuff on social media." I'm like, the idea that anybody would give any credence to what they read on social media, it is bots, it is lies, or it is people with an agenda. You know,
but that doesn't stop most people, I guess, is my point, from caring about all of that stuff. But you seem like you have sort of a healthy detachment from, you know, giving those people too much credibility, or whether they're real people or not.
Yeah, look, they're just generally not. But you know, it used to be that you had to earn your way towards a place where people would listen to you. Now then, anybody can talk. But if you're walking down the road and you see a group of people coming at you that look like they're up to no good, you cross the street. You don't stop and engage with them. So why would you stop and engage with the people on social media? You know, if I was walking around the U.S. Open every day, I would walk around the U.S. Open before we'd go on the air. You know, maybe in the course of a week, I would have had several hundred people say something to me. And not one negative comment.
Really?
Not one.
Yeah.
We're talking about several hundred interactions over the course of 7 days with people. Because what transpires on social media, one, it's fake for the most part. But two, the discord and the bullying, it's anathema to face-to-face conversation. You know, that's just not how people behave. You don't get to act like that face-to-face. You know, you don't get to engage in conversation, generally speaking, if you're rude or profane. It's just not how. It's not to say that I haven't had people stop me and take issue with my stance against LIV. I have, but it didn't happen at the US Open. And it's only happened a handful of times, and I've been doing this long before LIV was LIV. Been taking issue with the Saudi involvement in golf since the first Saudi international event. So we're sneaking up on 5 years now. But the few times that I've had people take issue with me in public, it's been very congenial. And I'm happy to debate the topic when it's congenial.
There's a conversation I remember having with you, must have been like March 11th or 12th, 2020. And it was right before the pandemic shut the world down and golf down. And it was also right after Rory had really spoken up for the first time about, you know, I wasn't crazy about where the money was coming from. And I remember you saying, look, there's going to be people that are going to have to make some tough decisions if some of this starts looking like it's going to look like, you know, Dylan, if someone's going to pay you X millions of dollars per year, how is that going to affect, you know, the choices you make with your hypothetical career? That's the sort of decision that these players and other people in the golf ecosystem are going to make. And it's not so much a question, and just as that something that sticks out in my mind as a moment in time that I can crystallize, like, wow, that's when it became real for me.
Yeah.
Was the days around then. Was it on your radar a long time before then? I guess you mentioned that the Saudi involvement was already there. And does that still seem like a turning point in the game?
Definitely, yeah. You know, when the Saudi international event started, and I don't think it's coincidental that it started shortly after the murder and dismembering of Jamal Khashoggi. But from that moment to this moment, it's tilted the entire game towards greed. And I would say perhaps catastrophically towards greed, you know. And I always used to say that, you know, when people would ask me about different scandals that arose in the game, you know, Tiger, whatever they may be like, it's none of my business, because, you know, my job is to analyze the golf. I'm not talking about the character of people or morals or values. I'm talking about golf. That's what I do. But the whole LIV Saudi wealth fund investment trying to buy the success of the West has made now sport is about character, and it is about morals, because it's about people who will sell their souls to turn a blind eye to murder. So it's the corrupting of the sport now based upon greed and based upon turning a blind eye to murder. So, you know, the game has been tilted towards greed. And I say catastrophically because the greed is unrealistic. You know, not to get all philosophical on you, but
Please.
The game is confounded with moral circumstances. I'll give you this. So I'm going to ask you this question. So
yeah.
Everywhere in the world that golf is played as a sport, okay, where it's legitimately played as a sport, not as a sports washing vehicle, people will travel and play the sport there for free. They'll play in the National Amateur Championships. They'll literally play for free. So who won the Saudi Arabia Amateur Championship in 2022? Right? Didn't happen, right? Because nobody's going to travel to Saudi Arabia and play for MBS and his murderous thugs for free. You have to be paid to turn a blind eye to murder. And they're being paid so much that it's tilting the entire game towards greed. And again, not to get all philosophical on you, but you can't help but think about the great philosophers and the words they had and how it has everything to do with what's going on in golf. You know, if Aristotle is right in that virtue is something that we can cultivate through practice, is the same not true of greed? So if altruism begets altruism, does not greed beget greed? You know, Rousseau said something very similar when he suggested that the more a country asks of its citizens, the greater their devotion to it. So I would argue, does it not then follow that the less a sport asks of its athletes, does the necessary devotion to it, needed to excel at it, not become a risk? And I would say it absolutely does. And that's unfortunately where we're headed in the game. You know, because these players don't even understand it, is that they're being used as instruments. And this is the sad part. This is what's happening in our game, is that they're being used as instruments. They're being bought to help hide murders and atrocities. And should everything be up for sale in our society? Should everything? Because the market can determine the price of bread. That's what the market does. It's very successful at that. But should the market be able to decide the impunity with which someone could commit human atrocities, crimes against humanity, should the market be able to determine that? It wasn't that long ago that slaves were treated as commodities, robbing them of everything, not least the freedom and dignity of living autonomous lives. And in the process, that corrupted all the economies that depended upon and profited from their labor and sale. And it was, you know, over time, the morals and values, the global morals and values of the world changed, such that slavery ultimately became seen for what it was, which was the biggest blight in the history of humanity, and it was abolished. But here we are, less than 2 centuries later, and the morals and the values of the world are changing such that with the commoditization of seemingly everything in the world makes it not only possible, but acceptable to commit crimes against humanity and pay for the forgiveness. And the vehicle for that forgiveness, right now, the main vehicle, is sport. And it's disgusting to see what's going on. I applaud Lionel Messi for turning a blind eye to $1.7 billion. Now, mind you, he got lauded for it, and he got paid for, you know, it was leverage,
Yeah.
but he did say no to them. You know, Endeavor, the entertainment agency Endeavor, gave back $400 million to them. People are saying no to them. Not everybody, not enough. But I thought of all the people in the world that could say no to them, and maybe this is quixotic, but I don't think it is. It was golfers. Because again, golfers answer to nobody. They have the autonomy to tell MBS and his murderous thugs, listen, you want our complicity in your operation? Then show me real evidence of reform in your country. Where is that real evidence? Have you abolished the male guardianship law? Do you still put homosexuals in bags and beat them with bats and throw them off buildings for fun? Where's the freedom of expression in your country? Where's the freedom of religion in your country? You know, where are those things? Show me real evidence of reform. Show me that. And okay. And look, you know, this merger, you know, for most people it looks like, oh, the tour's up for sale. The tour can be sold now. And because Saudi money is in everything, it's, you know, clean and dirty money's everywhere, good and blood money's everywhere. they're taking a page out of Russia and China's book of sort of co-opting one business makes it harder for another business to say no. And
Right.
next thing you know, it's everywhere. But, and someone made this point to me recently, and I thought it made a lot of sense. It was like, okay, so here's Uber, which has 10% of the PIF money, 10% of it's in there. You still use Uber, right? Because it is a great benefit, and you're mildly disgusted with PIF money being in it. But it's not 100% of Uber. So it's like, at what point would the investment in golf not make you completely disgusted? In other words, if the entire game were co-opted by PIF and the Saudi wealth fund, if this deal goes through, they've got a seat at the board, for crying out loud.
Right.
At what point would you not be entirely disgusted with it? And it's like, well, it's certainly not 100%, it's not 80%, it's not 60%, but if they owned 10% of it, because we can't keep it out, because if you own a publicly traded company, you can't control who invests in it. If we can't keep it out, can we do everything we can to keep it out until they, if they want to buy the success of the West and pretend that they're surrogate to the success, at least try to get out of the 7th century. Have a collision with modernity. Okay, we don't chop journalists up if they say things we don't like. We don't essentially enslave women from birth till death and make them dependent upon men. We don't do that. And I felt like golfers were in a unique place to say no to that. Even, what's sad about Phil Mickelson is that he admitted it. You'd have to be a complete moron not to know it, but Phil admitted they were bad people. But then in the next breath said, but he could use them for leverage. And that's what made what Phil said and everything that's transpired since then about Phil so incomprehensible and sad.
Do you feel like there is any, I guess Phil's approach to some extent has been like, hey, this is the world we're living in, baby, Yeah. You gotta get on board because it's coming whether you like it or not. Where I've sort of thought of, I guess maybe Rory typifies this on the PGA Tour as wanting to have autonomy and control over something that, it has been different. The approach has been different, certainly, than if every golfer just went to LIV. But is there an inevitability towards a world that Phil Mickelson envisions? Is there any resisting this Saudi takeover of sports and golf specifically?
Well, I think if the deal doesn't go through, it will open the tour up to clean, good money investment. And the idea that the Saudi wealth fund, people love to say they have all the money in the world, a $650 billion investment fund, it's laughable to think that represents all the money in the world. There's something like $140 trillion of money floating around the world that you could call somewhat clean and good to be invested in the tour. And it's opened the eyes up of a great many people who have good, clean, honest money, who want to invest it in golf. And now then that they're, the model is to have some for-profit operation as part of the PGA Tour, they could come in and perhaps save golf from, this alliance. The sad thing about, Rory, I would say, his opposition to LIV is based upon a conscience and his character. I will say the world will tell you what to do. Golf will tell you what to do. Life will tell you what to do if you listen. And I just don't think Phil was listening. He was like, how can I make as much money as I can? How can I get mine? And, how can I, as profoundly as I can, denigrate the PGA Tour? Phil reminds me a lot of Patrick Cantlay. They both think they're the smartest people in any room they walk into. They're both smart, I have no doubt that Phil's smart. I have no doubt that Patrick Cantlay's smart. But you're likely not the smartest person in the room. Otherwise, you're likely in the wrong room. And they've confused, I think, their talent in one aspect with their talents in other aspects. And they think that they could be the deal makers here and leverage this. And that's the part about this. It's the greed has given golfers a reward mentality that is not anchored in reality. You're simply not worth what you think you are. You're not.
Yeah,
You
the
play
world
it-
has already valued you in a certain way.
The market determines what you're worth.
Were golfers underpaid before this?
Lord, no. Underpaid. You know, if you go look at the top 100 sports earners of all time, 3 of the top 5 were golfers. Of the top 5.
Yeah.
They're golfers. Are they underpaid? No. I mean, it's ludicrous to think so. I mean, to me, it's like, does bread cost too much? Does milk cost too much? The market determines what you're worth. If the market is telling them, based upon your 1.5 rating on TV or your 2.2 rating on TV, that you can play for $9 million, because corporations are not dumb. They know what they can spend and the value that they get. The people that run these corporations, they're the smartest people in the room, okay? Not Phil, not Patrick Cantlay. They're confusing the corruption of certainly not market principles of what people will pay for sports washing with reality. And they think that that's what they're worth. You know, $25 million purses are unsustainable based upon the market. That was obvious a few years ago, more obvious now. You know, I would have thought if Jay would have walked into that meeting with the players and said, look, we've got 2 options here. We can keep fighting these guys. Actually, 3 options. Keep fighting these guys and go broke. Or we can take them in as partners and we'll all play for $20, $25 million. But in the process, the reputation of the game gets sullied, your reputation gets sullied. Or we can go tell them no deal. We'll probably have to jettison the Korn Ferry Tour, probably have to jettison the PGA Tour Champions Tour, and not play for $25 million, pay for $12 million. We can do that. We can sustain that. That is sustainable. And if we want to do that, I'm your guy. I'm the commissioner. And if you guys want to do that other stuff, I understand it, but I'm not your guy. I resign. To me, that's the stuff that they write movies about. You know, that's the stuff they write books about. That is a great leader. Now, I realize, again, that's probably romantic or quixotic. And it's hard to know what you would do unless you were in that room. But the idea, and I know technically they didn't sell golf to the Saudis, but that's the way it looked. And now it looks like golf is up for sale. And it's that they're quick to sacrifice their principles for profit. I realize it was a tough dilemma that the tour was in, and they wouldn't have been in the dilemma if it wasn't for Phil. You know, when you look at the different players that defected, you know, to LIV, they were all varied. You know, there was you wouldn't look at him twice in Home Depot Taylor Gooch, to the testosterone twin peaks of Brooks Koepka and Dustin Johnson, to the flatulently egoed impresario of Greg Norman. But Phil was the only one that could really make a difference. You know, he was the only one. And he was not motivated by altruistic thoughts. He was moved and motivated by greed. And that tilted the game in that direction. And so when I think about the dilemma that the tour was in, it wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for Phil. You know, that's why I think Phil should be removed from the Hall of Fame. I don't think he has any business being in the Hall of Fame. You know, He's caused irreparable damage to the game. And you know, if the tour's philanthropic aspect dies, the autopsy should read LIV. It should read Phil.
You and Phil have had some back and forth just on social media. Has there been any contact outside of that? Is there any material possibility to you guys sitting down and having a chat on TV, or is that?
Look, I told him he was welcome to come up on our set anytime. He passed it up saying he was busy that week, but you know, he could have come up. He wasn't busy at 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock. He could have popped up there for, you know, made his case. And look, if he thought he would have come out on the winning side of that debate, he was like, I don't want you guys to make any more money. First of all, you know, you're going to be on the set for 10 or 15 minutes. I doubt we're going to be able to monetize that in any significant way, Phil. Again, you overvalue your worth. But the flip side of that is, if he really thought he could win, then he could have done great benefit to his team and LIV. And he would have financially benefited from that, not us. If he'd have really thought that he could have won a debate, but he knows his position is morally indefensible. He knows that. You know, after he said he couldn't come up, you know, there were, you know, there was some guys I know offered to, you know, sort of be intermediaries between he and I in a sort of a sit down, not unlike this, and he passed on that. And I guess he said, yeah, you can come and do one on Piers Morgan, which happens to coincide with the U.S. Women's Open. But it's like, I legitimately am busy that week. And I've listened to Piers Morgan, you know, and I, you know, it's funny. I've listened to Piers Morgan talk about it. I've listened to Tucker Carlson talk about it. And, you know, I think both those guys are smart. And I think they're both, you know, great on TV. But I think they're missing the point of this as well. And that, you know, they make the argument that every business is co-opted, and that, you know, the United States government does business with China and Saudi Arabia, and that's, you know, that's the foundation of their points. Like, well, the United States has geopolitical issues that golfers do not have. You know, we aligned ourselves with two of the worst human beings that have ever walked on the planet. We aligned ourselves with Stalin to beat Hitler. We aligned ourselves with Mao to sort of keep Russia from doing their thing after World War II. You could argue that eventually led to the collapse of the it wasn't Russia, sorry, Soviet Union. That led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I think everybody understands why we, from a geopolitical standpoint, have aligned ourselves to some extent with Saudi Arabia. But individuals don't have to make those complicated choices. They have the autonomy to say no. And if we're going to allow the commoditization of just everything in the world, then it's a race to the bottom. It's an absolute race to hell. And that's what's on the desk here. That's what's on the table here is can you commoditize human atrocity? And golfers were in a pretty good spot to say, not on my watch.
On that day that the merger, for lack of a better term, was announced, there were a bunch of people, Brooks Koepka, your old pal included, who were saying, oh, you know, how's Brandel doing? Welfare check on Chamblee, I think was his tweet. Did you feel any sense of betrayal, regret, any misgivings about anything you had said on that day, looking back?
No. I mean, betrayal, yeah. Shock, yeah. You know, it was incomprehensible to me. For a while, I thought, well, this can't be real. My wife was traveling with a group of girlfriends at the airport. I had gotten out of my car, walked her to the plane, gave her a kiss on the cheek, got back in the car, and I had 50 text messages. And I thought, this can't be real. Somebody's pulling my leg here. I'm being punked. Then our main producer called me and he said, you know, can you go on the air? And I was still driving home. I was in a T-shirt. I was like, hold on, let me get home and read about this first. So, at first, when I finally got my arms around it, I thought, okay, why would the tour do this? I was like, then it became, all of a sudden, then you start to put yourself in your shoes, like, why would they do this? You're like, their financial situation had to be so bleak. And then, of course, there had to be legal vulnerabilities that on both sides that needed to be quelled. And you think, okay, there's no way they make that deal unless, and you don't know that to be the case, but you can pretty much assume it. And that seems to be the reason behind it. So, at first, yeah, betrayal. The Brooks thing and the Phil thing, one, I thought, it was childish on their part. But two, I thought it was a bit ignorant, because it wouldn't have been hard to look at if there is actually a merger with the tour. That means they all lost their jobs that day. And their new boss, the person they were going to have to come through was Jay Monahan. So they're all walking around like peacocks thinking they got promoted when they got fired. But it goes with who they are. If you look at the people that defected for the most part to LIV, they were self-absorbed, narcissistic types who want to pound their chest and act like, they're being a force for good, all the while knowing that they're a force for evil, a force for the decay of the game of golf, that they're really just out for their own narcissistic greed. But yeah, I came to over the next 3 or 4 days, as we all did, because we all dove in and do what we do and read about it and try to get your arms around that deal and talk to everybody that you can that's close to it to try to form some opinion. And it's just clear to me that the tour wouldn't be in this position if it wasn't for the defectors, if it wasn't for Phil. And that's it. And then given the circumstances of the intractable legal fees and trying to keep up with the purses, and trying to diminish the threat as much as they can. Some very smart guys were in that room. I mean, very smart. Smarter than Patrick Cantlay, smarter than Phil Mickelson. Very smart guys were in that room. And I think, when you look at Jimmy Dunn, and, you ever heard that saying, when someone shows you who they are, believe them?
Believe them.
Right? Okay. So I do believe that Jimmy Dunn showed the world who he was after 9/11, when he did not have to, but he honored paying insurance and college graduation, college tuition for all the kids of all the people that died in on that tragic day. I mean, how many people in business do the right thing? I mean, more than people think. But that's an example of somebody showing you who they are. And so, when I talked to Jimmy on the phone, I have no doubt that Jimmy is trying to do the best thing he could do for the game of golf, and that it was an untenable situation. I wish that the PGA Tour wasn't in that situation. I think that the derision being directed at Jay and Ed and Jimmy, and I think it should be more directed at the people who denigrated the PGA Tour as they were defecting to LIV. That's what really set golf down this path. We always say that golf's been lucky that it's had great superstars who've been caretakers of the game, and that's true. It was true of Bobby Jones. It was true of Jack Nicklaus. It was true of Arnold Palmer. They were all, Jack and Arnold for sure. Tom Watson, they were all given the opportunity to defect and start their own tours. They were all presented with those ideas in their era, but they turned them down because it wasn't great for golf and it was selfish for them. Greg Norman came along and that's all he's been trying to do his entire career. Let me get mine. Let me get paid. I'm worth more than the market says I am. And that's what set golf down this path. So, when I look at how unlucky golf has been in my view, the lack of character of Phil and Norman as preeminent figures in the game of golf, it's set golf down this path, and it's put the head of governing bodies in a pretty tough spot. But having said that, again, I still think there's an opportunity for better economic choices that I think are available now to the tour. So if the deal doesn't go through, good, clean money can come in and combat the problem of the Saudi wealth fund trying to buy all of sport, but in particular golf.
How has the last year been for you personally? I mean, you've sort of made it sound like you can brush this stuff off, like the controversy and the criticism, but I mean, a job that used to involve golf controversies about, you know,
Right.
rules scandals and hoodies and whatever else is now geopolitical. It's much more personal. It's much more like politics and the rest of the world. How has that affected your life and the way your life intersects with your job and your enjoyment of that job?
Yeah, I'd look forward to getting back to just talking about golf and golf swings. I mean, I love looking at golf swings and trying to connect dots, and I love that. I absolutely love it. I look forward to it as much as I used to look forward to getting up and hitting golf balls. You know, and I would rather not spend all day long looking at videos of debates about Saudi Arabia. You know, I would rather not be buying books about geopolitical issues and geography and you know, spending almost half my days trying to figure out how to navigate the politics of what's going on in the world of golf. I'd much rather not be doing that. It's time consuming, but what else are you going to do? Because that's where golf's at, you know, and it's my job to talk about not just golf swings, but golf. And so that's the nature of the job now. That's what it requires. What's it been like? I wouldn't say it's any more or less stressful than my job otherwise was. Maybe slightly less enjoyable, but you know, there's always, I call it stress. It's not stress. It's a sense of urgency to try to get your arms around what's going on in golf and to say it in a different way than you said it yesterday. That's the toughest thing about your job, probably, is to write about the same thing you wrote about last week and say it in a different way this week.
Sure.
And then the next week. And that's the same thing with my job. Is like, how am I going to talk about Jon Rahm this week? What can I say different about Jon Rahm at the U.S. or at the Open Championship that I didn't say at the U.S. Open? Well, luckily his game changes, things change in the game, the course changes, and so you can always try to, but to do that, it takes a lot of time. And that's fun for me. It's really fun for me. I really enjoy it. But the political stuff and the attacks, you know, it just comes with the job. And in the social media world that we live in, it's inevitable. I mean, if Mother Teresa were alive today, she'd be getting vilified on social media. You know, you take the most honorable human being you've ever known. If they're on social media, they're getting vilified. If they're doing anything, they're getting vilified. And again, what most people don't realize is you don't even know who is on social media. Mm-hmm. You don't know those people. You don't know what their motivation is, even if they're real people or who they are. Unless it's somebody I know on social media, I pay scant regard to it. If it's somebody I know, if it's you or it's Riggs from Barstool or the No Laying Up guys or Justin Ray or somebody I work with, and I look at and they're criticizing something I say, I'm like, all right, well, this is an absolute, justifiable,
What about when it's Phil Mickelson?
Well, look, I always consider the bias of where a criticism is coming from. So I'm not saying that I think they're valid criticisms. I'm like, I'll try to read behind the bias of it and try to see, is it well-founded? Is it well-intended? Was I wrong? And yeah, if you're wrong, you're like, yeah, actually, they're right. They got it right. I'll change my opinion. They've presented evidence that contradicts mine. I'll absolutely change my opinion. Look, Phil is in an indefensible position morally. There's nothing Phil could say to me about LIV that would have any merit. What he's doing is morally indefensible, and he knows it. And people that are close to him know it. And he knows that. So, you know, what Phil is doing is trying to sell a lie. And nobody sounds more insincere or stupid when they're trying to sell a lie. And that's what he's trying to do. And that's what MBS is trying to do. And that's what LIV's trying to do. They're trying to sell a lie. And I'm not buying it.
What's up, guys? Dylan Dethier here, bringing you part 2 of our Golf Magazine interview with Brandel Chamblee. If you want the rest, check out Golf.com. Check out the Drop Zone podcast where this full thing is going to live. Again, a little bit of me, but mostly Brandel Chamblee.